Ayers of Reddit, what was your "oh, now you really messed up" moment? Story 1. Unfortunately, my best story for this is from my own client. We had a client who was on the board of directors for a company and was being sued for allegedly not telling the board something. His part of the case was really only a smaller part of a larger and more complicated case, so while there were a lot of other issues in the case overall, the entire case against him specifically essentially boiled down to whether or not he told the board about X. I and a few other attorneys spent an entire week, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or later, Monday through Friday, prepping this client for his deposition by going over every document in the case with him and explaining why it was important. On several occasions we reiterated that no matter what else happened in the case, as long as we can show that he told the board about X, he was fine. The day of the deposition arrives. Opposing counsel sits down and starts questioning our client. In the first 5 to 10 minutes of the deposition, opposing counsel straight up asks our client what he told the board. Client responds, "I told them about Y, I told them about Z, I told them about A, B, and C, and says nothing about X." Literally the only issue in the case against him. In over 20 years of practice, it was the closest I've ever come to rage quitting on a client. Comment 1. I was tangentially involved in a custody dispute. Dad alleged mom was doing all sorts of things and he should have the kid. Dad's attorney grilled mom for about 20 minutes on texts she had sent claiming to sell her prescriptions. She wouldn't admit it. Dad's attorney moved on and eventually ended with, "One more question. Where did you get the pills you were selling?" Mom responds without thinking, "Oh, my doctor prescribed them." Comment 2. They were trying to prove she sold her pills, not that she didn't have any pills. If the lawyer had just said, "Where did you get your pills?" it would be like your toaster analogy. He asked, "Where did you get the pills you sold?" Basically, if she said anything besides, "I didn't sell the pills," she implies that she sold the pills she got, which is what they're trying to prove. So using your toaster analogy, it's more like if you harmed someone named Jake with a toaster. Then the lawyer asks you, "What did you put in the toaster you harmed Jake with?" If you respond with toast, you imply that you harmed Jake with the toaster because you aren't disagreeing with it. Story 2 years ago, I worked in personal injury, and we had a woman come to us saying that she slipped and fell outside of a nail salon because they hadn't swept up the wet leaves outside the door. So we take the case, and almost immediately we get a call from opposing counsel saying he's going to courier us something important. We open it, pop the disc in the computer, and right there is security cam footage of our client picking up the wet leaves, putting them on the sidewalk, and sitting down on them before calling for help. I have never facepalmed so hard. Needless to say, we dropped the case. Comment 1. This happened to me at night, with no witnesses. I was the only car on the street. I got so lucky that we had the same insurance company, and this was the 6th or so time that he filed a similar claim. My agent said that he ended up getting in some sort of trouble for insurance fraud but couldn't disclose details, only that my plan would remain unaffected. Literally, the middle of the night, I'm at a stop sign. He throws something in front of my car when I stop, then he comes and jumps on my hood hard enough to leave a dent. Then lays on the ground and calls 911, claimed to the officer that he was trying to cross the street and I ran the stop sign. A lawyer from my insurance company helped me with the failure to yield ticket and I didn't have to pay anything there either. It could have been so much worse. Some people are just awful. Story 3. Had a bylaw officer harass me almost constantly for 8 months for violating a bylaw. I had parked my motorcycle in my driveway. He ordered me to remove it and tried to levy fines for the violation. He went after my landlord and tried to get me evicted. Eventually, I got a lawyer and filed a complaint. When asked to point to the bylaw I was breaking, he did, and even read it out, which basically read no parking or storing anything in a driveway other than an automobile. He seriously thought a motorcycle wasn't an automobile because an automobile is a car. When I hired my lawyer and showed him the case, he said, "I'm not taking new clients right now, but I'll make an exception because I'm personally offended that this is happening to you." Everything was thrown out, and I'm currently working on getting my legal fees and extra payments for all the harassment. Comment 1. When people trash lawyers, I like to remember cases like this. I had a slip and fall injury that resulted in multiple fractures due to negligence on the behalf of the venue. They tried to offer me money through their local manager but denied it was compensation. "But if you'd like to come and sign a few papers," when I responded with my profession and how I'd be off work, with, "But I'm willing to discuss the issue," they ghosted me. So I drafted up a letter, found out their insurance company, and approached a lawyer. The lawyer basically took what I wrote and faxed it on his letterhead. After a few days, I got a response from the insurance company, and apparently, they were very upset about the management company approaching me like they had. They were pretty straightforward and reasonable, so I told the lawyer I'd pay him for the services rendered but wouldn't need representation unless negotiations broke down and I had to sue. Surprisingly, he told me not to worry about it and charged me nothing. I worked things out on my own with the insurance company and got a reasonable settlement. It broke any assumptions I had about either all lawyers or insurance companies being money-grubbing. Story 4: A doctor testifying under oath that he deliberately chose not to inform a pregnant woman of a positive test result for a really severe genetic disorder because he figured, since she was a member of his church, she wouldn't have considered terminating the pregnancy under any circumstances. A primary care doctor who received a complex and technical test report from a genetics lab and simply forwarded it to the patient, who didn't really speak English and wasn't medically educated. She testified that she performed the minimum required diligence, which is not what you should say and expect a good outcome. Comment 1: The child, in this case, was born severely physically and mentally disabled permanently. This outcome would have been 100% predictable, beyond a reasonable doubt, well within the first trimester. They would require constant and expensive care. As one of the authors who wrote about this case points out, the doctor who failed to perform his duty would not have to care for the child for the rest of their life. Story 5: This was in a custody dispute, jury trial. We represented the father of young twins, and the mother wanted child support. The issue was that, for the past 3 years, they had been sharing the kids exactly 50-50, as in he got a weekend, she got a weekend, one of them got Monday and Tuesday, the other got Thursday and Friday, and they split Wednesday. There was no reason not to have a shared custody order with each parent paying their own expenses, but she thought she could get more, so there we were. The thing was, she did not have a case. She kept taking the kids to Child Protective Services and child psychologists before the trial to make a reason why she should have primary custody, but we managed to get all of that excluded. So on the day of the trial, her big argument is that these kids have asthma. Severe asthma. The kind of asthma that requires special equipment, and the father is ignoring these issues. He's negligent. He's endangering them. She should have custody. The trial is generally going our way. She's not a great witness, she doesn't have any medical records to back up these allegations, and we have the children's daycare teacher testifying that she doesn't know anything about any special equipment or severe asthma. But the moment that sealed the deal came when the mother called her last witness. The last witness to testify was the children's grandmother, the mother's mother. The jury already knew that she frequently babysat the 2 kids and that her apartment was often a drop-off location for the kids. The mother swore that the grandmother never smoked in front of the kids and that her apartment was not a dangerous environment for asthmatic children. The grandmother was called last minute by the mother as a rebuttal witness. As she took the stand, the grandmother leaned over into the microphone and cleared her throat. "I hatch 'em." It was a 2 or 3 second long expression of smoky phlegm. I don't recall exactly what the grandmother said in her testimony, but I remember she sounded like decades of 3-pack-a-day smoking when she said it. After a half hour of deliberations, the jury awarded primary custody to the father. He immediately started crying, while the mother sat motionless. It was a good result. Story 6: Not a lawyer, but this happened to me. I was living in an abusive household, where my partner, the roommate, and 2 of their friends were terrorizing me. I gave them 1 month's notice and moved out. They put some of my stuff on the lawn the day after I told them. It was horrible, but I got through it. Then, they tried to take me to small claims court and get around $3,500 from me for violating the lease. I didn't. I read it like 10 times and checked with the leasing office. Want to know what they didn't bring to show the judge? A copy of the lease. The case was denied, and I never spoke to them again. Edit to fix a spelling error. Edit 2 for a bit of story. For those curious, I moved into a 3-bedroom townhouse with my significant other Kevin and 2 of his friends that he vouched for. I trusted his judgment. Once we were all living together, it became clear that the 2 friends were not trustworthy roommates. They gave another girl a key to our place, and apparently, I was a petty person for not liking her and for wanting the key back. Matt was nice enough, but he tried to leave for the summer to a secluded, internet-free camp without paying rent. We worked it out, and he wasn't around for the majority of the situation. I count him as a friend in this story because he wasn't around most of the time. The other, Jason, went through 6 or more jobs in 5 months, couldn't pay rent on time ever, and was emotionally unstable, getting intoxicated every night and punching things, and projecting his mental health issues onto me. Over the summer, he progressively became more toxic, screaming at me through the vents about how I was such a childish person for not wanting to spend time around him, demanding I clean up after him because I had a day off work, and generally stomping around the house accusing me of being toxic because I wanted to have alone time after work and my boyfriend changed. He became mean and did nothing when his friends verbally assaulted me. He even said that I was a depression blob and maybe if I didn't act like that, his friends wouldn't call me those things. They stayed up late gossiping about me, talking about how bad I was in intimate situations, how I needed to pull my weight more around the house, and how I was terrible for various reasons. So I moved out, dumped him, and blocked them. I can't remember most of my time living there. I have post-traumatic stress disorder, unrelated, and block out bad things. Story 7. So, picture it, mother and father are in a custody dispute. Mother's not making a lot of money, but she's hustling as best as she can to take care of her kids. Father's a deadbeat. He actually was supposed to originally have primary custody but skipped out, so she's been taking care of them for a couple of years, and now she wants primary custody officially transferred to her and he's fighting it because he's a narcissist. Anyways, in many jurisdictions, in addition to the lawyer for each side, assuming that the person isn't arguing without a lawyer, like the father in this case, because not everyone can afford a lawyer or thinks they need one when there's a child involved, the court appoints a guardian ad litem who represents the child. The guardian ad litem interviews the parents, interviews the child, does some basic investigating, and reports to the judge about their assessment. In this case, the guardian ad litem said outright that the mother was probably the better bet, but he thinks that both parents should take a substance test just in case. Both parents had previous substance abuse problems, and both claimed to be clean. Well, the judge had no problem with any of that and sends the parents off to be tested right then. Social services sent someone to administer the tests, I believe. That's done, everybody comes back to the courtroom, judge reads the results out loud. Mother tested negative for everything. Father tested positive for cocaine and now, as the mother's attorney, and the guardian ad litem, made sure to emphasize, cocaine doesn't stay detectable for very long. Either the father used it very recently, he admitted in court that he'd gone to a party and used it, or he was such a habitual user that it remained detectable for longer. The party that he'd been at was the previous weekend, which was outside of the approximately 3-day range that cocaine remains in your system, so if that was indeed the only time he'd used it, then he must have been using substances non-stop the week before for it to linger so long. Things really did not go well for him. After that, mother ended up with primary custody of the kids. Father ended up looking very bad in front of the judge. Story 8. When my client filed a restraining order against his ex and then asked me to leverage the restraining order just so he could get back with her. In our state, if you do this, you'll have to pay the other person's attorney's fees. Comment 1. So basically, she has a very professional job, and if she had a restraining order on her record, she'd lose her job and business. Even though it was temporary until the official hearing, she'd have issues. He knew it was his word against hers and there was a questionable police report, so it could have gone either way. He wanted to scare her into going to couples therapy with him since she had filed for the divorce. He was very manipulative. His rationale was, either lose your job or get back with me. If he won the restraining order, he would also be able to get his attorney's fees paid for, and she made way more than him, so if he won, the judge would most likely order she pay his attorney's fees. Also, if he won, she'd have no leverage when it came to the divorce. Story 9. My father, as a young lawyer, was trying to get a case to take place in one state and not another because the insurance laws were more favorable in State A. The company he was in litigation with wanted it in State B for that reason, and claimed they only distributed in State A but had no locations in it and should not have to go to court in State A. Well, this company was a soda company and my dad has a major diet soda addiction. He goes through at least a 12-pack a day. So they were in a meeting with the soda company lawyers and took a break, and he went downstairs to get a diet soda. When it came out, he noticed on the can that it said, distributed by the XYZ soda company of State A. So he got another diet soda and brought that one upstairs to the meeting. The XYZ soda company decided to settle after that. This was in the late 1970s or early 1980s, I believe. Story 10. I was involved in a civil suit against an organization that allegedly allowed and attempted to cover up misconduct against an at-risk population. During a deposition of a victim, the opposing counsel began asking an aggressive line of questions, accusing the deposed of having been convicted of making false reports in the past, and convictions for forgery and identity theft. After our Client answered with a simple no to about a dozen of these questions. Opposing counsel became belligerent, eventually basically signaling that at trial he would be producing mugshots, as well as conviction records, as well as charges for perjury. Right about that point, he becomes ghost white, pulls very close to his face what is clearly a photo he had in a folder, looks at it closely, then shoves it back in and asks to conclude the deposition. He had pulled records on the wrong person. I later found this other person, and while their names were the same, the ages were more than 15 years apart. Comment 1. This was a couple of decades ago where information was not nearly as readily available as it is today, certainly including photos. The date of convictions, etc., were believable that our client was the person in question, but from my recollection, they absolutely did not look anything alike whatsoever. One looked like a career criminal and substance user. Our client absolutely did not. Story 11 posted this one a little while ago, but it does fit here. Not a lawyer, but I have a similar type of experience to share. Where I live, municipal zoning rights are controlled by a board that has a nickname of the Green Taliban, so named because they are extremely serious about anything to do with environmental regulations. I live in one of the most left-leaning, environmentally conscious areas of the country. Their answer to anything that isn't 100% in compliance with the most stringent environmental codes is almost always no. Anyways, this millionaire decides to move out to the area and buys an acreage. His plans for developing the land include creating an artificial cave for wine tasting parties, by blasting one into a cliff using mining explosives, and creating a new stream by draining a water body located on the property. Needless to say, these actions were rather controversial among the community, and he had to have a public hearing, which I attended, in front of the zoning board to explain himself. After a couple of pointed questions from the board, he loudly groused, "You know, where I come from, a very conservative part of the country, as it turns out, if we want to build a road and there's a lake in the way, we move the lake." That was about the point where I thought to myself, yeah, you definitely just lost your case. Congratulations on passing into local legend, though. Comment 1. What's unfortunate is that I bet the millionaire could have done what he wanted and even won the local support if he had modified his proposed ideas in a way that benefited the environment. Yes, I do wish to create an artificial cave, but my geologist has selected an area that can be easily converted with minimal impact on the surrounding landscape. You can see in these plans that the structures will be supplemented with solar power, and we plan to implement a wastewater recycling system to minimize potentially destructive runoff during construction. I have hired a biologist team to study the impact of creating a stream off of local body of water, and help with replanting the area with native plants once construction is complete. This is a beautiful area, and I want to ensure that it remains as such for future generations. He should have read the room better before he bought the land. Story 12. Not a lawyer, but this story still applies. My parents have a jewelry store, and the landlord was trying to pressure them to sign a lease for nearly double what it was appraised for. Problem was, the lease they signed and the landlord signed said when they renewed the lease, both parties were to get their own appraiser, then meet in the middle of what the two prices were. The landlord didn't like what his appraiser said, so he refused to tell my parents what the appraisal was. So for 2 years, he sent every lawyer in town to try to kick them out. They tried everything but legally had no leg to stand on. Well, unfortunately, during this time the landlord developed Parkinson's and his mind started to go. We finally got him to do a deposition, and that's where everything went downhill for him. It was like he drank a truth serum. He just told everything. My parents' lawyer would ask things like, "Why did you not show the appraisal to my clients?" And he'd say, "It wasn't what I wanted. I wanted them to pay more, so I hired other appraisers and paid them off to raise the price nearly double." Or another one was, "Why did you want them to pay you in gold that you would then sell back to them? Remember, it's a jewelry store." He said, "Oh, I didn't want to pay taxes." It was sad, honestly. His lawyer, by the end of it all, just had his head in his hands. We had a new lease within a month for less than we originally even offered, and he had to pay back 75% of our legal fees. Nearly $100,000. Story 13. My sister is a lawyer and had a client, a guy we actually know from childhood, telling her, "Doc, I just need you to go to court because I need a lawyer, but I really want to go back in." In our country, if you don't have a lawyer, the state provides one. He wanted someone he knew with him. He had a terrible life growing up, and by the time we were 16, he was arrested for the first time to do time in an adult prison. She did it pro bono because he was safer in prison than outside. Story 14. I am an attorney and a foster parent, and my wife won't sit next to me when we have to go to court for our kids because I usually have a running commentary on how inept the attorneys are. The judge for this type of case knows me and knows I'm an attorney, so he finds this entertaining. Last time we went in, before the health crisis, there was one attorney, who was my favorite, in the case before us. She's also an attorney in one of our matters, and the social workers, myself, the judge, and every other attorney dislike her in these matters because she's oblivious, loud, and incompetent. So she stands up in this case and goes, "Your Honor, my client has only been found guilty of child endangerment in county next to us, and county next to that. I see no reason that this court should hold that against him when it comes to custody of his children." The long-suffering judge asks, "Attorney oblivious, why did your client move to this county?" "Because he hoped Child and Youth Services here wouldn't intervene in his idea of discipline. I don't think that just because one county objected to him locking kids away from food and using a switch on them, we should automatically assume he is a bad parent. What about the love he has for these kids? All 3 kids were under 4 years old." Story 15. I've told this story before, but I might as well put it here. This guy wanted custody over his children after a divorce, and his wife was accusing him of physical abuse. He was asked if he had ever abused his wife, and he straight up said, "Yes, but only when she annoyed me," or something along those lines. I was ready to straight up leave the courtroom and laugh my head off. This was like 6 years ago, and I had forgotten about it until now. Thanks for the reminder. I forgot to remove this part when I copy-pasted this from my other reply to a question. I apologize. I don't seem like a good lawyer right now, do I? A story 16. Co-counsel on a case where a guy was being accused of intimate relations with a minor. Idiot client goes off topic and testifies that the woman smelled like a French person working in certain trades. Judge asks him what that smells like. Client admits he doesn't really know but assumes it's just like an American one. I'm like 2 weeks out of law school. This was all in open court, so I'm not violating any privileges here. Story 17. Obligatory. Not a lawyer, but this fits the bill pretty well. During the Menendez brothers' trial, when Eric was testifying that he and his brother went to a sporting goods store to purchase handguns in August of 1989. According to Eric, when told that there would be a 15-day waiting period on them, they chose to purchase shotguns instead. Eric even mentioned the case and shelf where the handguns had been sitting. The attorney then paused and said, "Mr. Menendez, did you know that the store stopped carrying handguns in March of 1986? Thank you to a user for linking the article that explains why this was such a big deal. It basically undermined the credibility of the Menendez brothers' testimony since they were caught lying under oath about the guns, which also made people question the other allegations they had made. The initial trial was deadlocked, however, the second trial saw them both convicted. There is a video showing the testimony in question. It starts at about 16:07. Story 18. A law professor once told me about a case from decades ago when he was defending a young woman on substance-related charges. In court, his line of defense was basically to tell the truth. This woman had turned to substances due to trauma and instability in her life, but she was now in a steady, loving relationship with another woman. For the first time, she had some peace and security in her life, was genuinely working on overcoming her struggles, and was unlikely to offend again. It was a 50-50 proposition on how this would land with the judge, until the prosecutor stood up and started criticizing the 2 women, the accused and her partner, for lying because those kinds of relationships aren't real, and similar remarks. According to the professor, everyone in the courtroom except the prosecutor could see that the judge himself was a member of the LGBTQ+ community, so this did not go over well. The judge tore into the prosecutor, gave a furious lecture on equal rights, and ended up giving the woman a very lenient sentence and wishing her well with her partner. Story 19. Not a lawyer, recent law school graduate studying for the bar. This happened this summer after my first year of law school. I was making a court appearance as a student attorney, basically, a rule in my state that lets students practice under attorney supervision. I was working with the public defender's office, representing a client at a first appearance on a probation violation and bail hearing. On a probation violation, the judge is allowed to hold a defendant without bail, keeping them in jail until the case is over. Client says he has some money, but not much. He could get together about $500 for bail. Okay, I'll ask the judge to keep it low or just release him. Prosecutor asks for $300 bail. Great, my work here is done. Whatever I say, the judge will order $300 or less and my client is out. I say my piece, and then my client interrupts the judge, saying some incoherent stuff about how he needs to get out and he's got various things going on. He won't let the judge speak. Judge holds him without bail even though the prosecutor didn't ask for it. All he had to do was stay quiet and he'd have gone home that afternoon. Story 20. I was trying a case where my client was charged with being a felon in possession of a firearm. The prosecutor has to prove, A, he had a firearm and, B, he is a felon. A, was not in dispute. The way to prove, B, is to bring into evidence a certified conviction and sentencing order. This guy had been convicted of several felonies in another state and one in my state. The prosecutor was having some issues with getting a certified out-of-state order and just relied on the single in-state order, which was provided to me in discovery. My client pointed out to me that neither the date of birth nor social security number on the order was his. At trial, when the prosecutor tried to introduce the conviction order, I objected on relevance. The name was the same, but the date of birth and social security number were different than what was on the indictment. The judge agreed and refused to let it into evidence. Not guilty. Story 21. I once had an unwise client who put out a public statement announcing that a subordinate had resigned. Then the subordinate announced that he had not resigned, and furthermore, had no intention of resigning. Then my client put out an email announcing that he had fired the subordinate. Then I had to advise my client that he didn't have the right to fire the subordinate. Then I had to explain to my client that he couldn't fire the man because he was not my client's subordinate at all. In fact, he was hired by, and worked for, a completely different subsidiary over which my client had no authority. So I got my client to put out a public statement saying that his boss, the chief executive, had fired the subordinate. Then my client's boss blabbed to everybody that he had not fired the subordinate and that he had thrown the whole matter back into my client's hands, and now, I have to spend the next 4 months studying all the statutes and case law pertaining to obstruction of justice. Sincerely, William Barr's lawyer. Story 22 inches 1. Where I was a jury member, almost all the evidence was on camera. One lawyer was trying to make his case on the fact that a mandated sweeping security check wasn't done on time, and if it had been, it would have potentially prevented what happened to his client. After him drilling in this point endlessly, the opposing counsel asked to see footage from around the time of the missed sweeping check. The video showed a specific visit to the client. A personal visit is far better than a sweeping check. The first lawyer was not such a smug guy anymore. Story 23. I was reviewing some documents of a case involving work-related death benefits. Naturally, the deceased's heirs were claiming the money as they were the beneficiaries. Basically, the heirs just had to prove that the deceased's death was work-related. I noticed that the official certificate of death said the person passed away on January 1st, for example. But the heirs had submitted hospital records showing the deceased had been admitted to that hospital in February. The dates were so radically different that it could not have been a typo. This was the turning point when their credibility was wiped out, and I knew that the claim was false. When the court eventually rendered judgment, the case was dismissed. The heirs never appealed or pursued it further. I think they knew their case had no chance. Story 24. Late to the party, but I'll chime in anyway. My firm had been chasing down this woman for years, trying to get her to pay out on a 6-figure judgment. She kept nothing in her personal bank accounts and used the money from her business accounts for a rather lavish lifestyle. She kept claiming she was broke and that she didn't use her company funds for her living expenses, including in affidavits filed with the court. During the citation deposition, at the beginning, she stated she was current on her mortgage for her large house. We went through all her finances and companies, and after a few hours I brought up the mortgage again and then asked, if you're broke, but current on your mortgage, how are you making mortgage payments? Dead silence. Then in a soft voice she said, I use company funds. Her attorney stopped the deposition and pulled her out of the conference room. My boss was observing and started laughing and told me it was a good question. Story 25. Not a lawyer. I was accused of driving under the influence. I wasn't under the influence, I was crying. During the road test, the officer asked me to stand on one foot and count. I did, but he started talking into his walkie-talkie, so I figured I'd start over when he was done and put my foot back down. He screamed, pick your foot back up. I did. I ended up standing there with my foot up for 1 minute, 45 seconds. Something my lawyer spotted and remarked in court. She was an absolute powerhouse. They offered me a plea deal. I didn't take it because I knew I was innocent. My lawyer coached me to not be my usual sarcastic self when I took the stand, the prosecutor tried and failed multiple times to stand on one foot for a minute and 45 seconds. I kept looking at my lawyer and she'd nervously shake her head at me to not be sarcastic. He kept saying, "You're telling me you could do this?" Finally, after multiple failed attempts by the prosecutor to do what I did on video, I said, "I feel like most people couldn't do it." That was the least sarcastic I could be. He looked up at me with pure hatred, and some of the jurors laughed, while the judge just shook his head. Not guilty. After 35 minutes of deliberation, story 26, I was sitting in court waiting for my case, and there was a basic traffic stop case going on. The prosecutor had the arresting officer walk through the incident. The officer recalled all these details about how he pulled the driver over for running a red light, then noticed a busted tail light. He said he stayed cool, calm, and collected, even as the driver became irate, cursing at him and telling him he could shove the ticket where the sun doesn't shine. The officer then claimed that the driver ripped up the ticket, rolled up the bits, and threw it at him. The officer sold the story well, and you could notice most of the courtroom had become invested. The driver was not a lawyer but chose to represent himself. He took all of a minute to embarrass the officer in court with a simple statement. "Your Honor," the officer testified, under oath, to the court that I acted illegally and belligerently, then aggressively tore up and threw away the ticket, which I find hard to believe seeing as this here is the ticket, in one piece, without even a crease on it. He then pulled out the ticket from a folder he had in front of him. You could hear many in the courtroom gasp, laugh, and mumble. The judge stopped the driver, looked over to the prosecutor, and addressed him. "Mr. Smith, thoughts?" Without hesitation, the prosecutor replied, "Yes, Your Honor, in deference to the court's time, we would like to go ahead and drop the case." All the other defendants waiting for their cases applauded. The judge banged his gavel, called for order in the courtroom, admonished the room, and then admonished the officer and prosecutor before closing it out. Story 27, I was with a fellow who committed a bank robbery when he was 15 years old. He stole a block of pure gold valued at around £7 million. He got caught after he tried sawing it in half in his garage at 3 a.m. after his neighbors called the police for a noise complaint. They burst right in and caught him cutting the gold block, arresting him on the spot because they recognized his face from the world's top wanted list. He was in custody with me, his lawyer, and he said he just wanted to bribe the sheriff's wife with half the gold. He then made it worse by pulling out a knife he had hidden under the skin in his thigh and harming 3 officers in the room. He was sentenced to 200 years. Story 28, I'm the victim in this case. There was a guy being charged with 3 counts of misconduct, 2 from when I was a minor and 1 from when I was 18. There wasn't much evidence for the case at all. No undeniable proof that he did any of it. All the state had going for them was me and my testimony. He was already in prison for unrelated charges. He went to prison right after the time I was 18. Because he was in prison, they had access to all of his calls and letters. One day, he decided to confess to being completely alone with me all night, where no one else could hear us, and that was enough to make even the state attorney facepalm and call him an idiot. Prior to the call, they would have had a much better chance at fighting because he and all of his family were willing to do anything to keep him out of trouble, including lying under oath. Had he not talked to the person on the phone about that night, we could have very easily lost. However, because of it, it sounds like his lawyer told him that his only chance at all was a plea bargain, which he eventually took. Story 29, custody battle. Lawyer for mom puts her on the stand for the sole purpose of establishing her credibility. She is questioned about the fact that the kids told their own lawyers that mom used substances with them at 12 and 13 years old. She argues that the children are lying. She then proceeds to state that the children would tell her all about abuse at the hands of their dad, abuse which never existed, which was never mentioned to either of the children's lawyers, because it never happened. So essentially, when they were talking about her, they were lying, but she wanted them to be believed when they told only her that dad was abusive. Same cross-examination. Mom admits to using medicinally. This was prior to any legalization or medicinal allowances being fully implemented. When asked if she had a legal prescription, she admitted she did not. Then, when asked where she got her medicinal substances, she said, local drugstore down the street. At that time, medicinal use was only available via online or mail order through a small number of government-controlled companies. Liar, liar, indeed. Remember, her lawyer put her on the stand in an effort to make her the more credible parent and discredit dad.